It's October, and thus my absolute favorite month of the year. The weather down here in Texas is just gorgeous. We have the state fair rolling into town. The Longhorns just whooped up on the Sooners. It's my wife and I's wedding anniversary. The house already smells like pumpkins. And of course, I get to take my 5-year-old out trick-or-treating for Halloween this year. So with Halloween right around the corner, I thought that this would be a perfect time to talk about running some good old-fashioned Halloween Dungeons and Dragons games. I've come up with a list of 5 campaign ideas, or D&D one-shots, for you to put your players up against in the spirit of the holiday. Now obviously guys, you shouldn't take these necessarily purely as is, but rather let them serve as a bit of inspiration. Okay, so first up on the list is a game inspired from Game of Thrones or Night of the Living Dead. Nothing, in my opinion, quite says Halloween like zombies. But zombies in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition don't exactly strike fear into your player's heart like they probably should, and that's mostly due to just how easy they are to get away from, which is why we want to take that option away from our players. So here's the pitch. The party ends up in a small town or village, or perhaps they were even called there to stop a small-time necromancer in the area. When dusk hits, suddenly scores and scores of undead begin wading into the middle of town, far more than what the players could deal with in a fight. Perhaps even the necromancer is seen cackling with a green glowing staff off in the woods as the players are forced to flee along with the rest of the townsfolk to the biggest building in the village. Maybe it's a tavern or perhaps some form of a town hall. You decide what seems the most appropriate. Also, while the players flee to the safe house, they see all sorts of men, women, and children being mobbed by the undead horde, followed by them then turning into more undead themselves. Guards, the blacksmith, the mayor, whatever. The important part here is that the players end up in the safe house with no real structure in place. We want the players to have to seize control and lead the survivors themselves. The object of the adventure is, of course, to survive the night. Now, the players must work to organize the survivors, reinforce the doors and windows while trying to figure out what is actually going on and how to escape. Of course, it makes more sense for this to be an adventure around maybe level 3 or 4 for your party, as we don't simply want them raining down fireballs or casting teleport to just bamf out of there. Mix in a second story to the building that must be guarded, some great NPCs with a range of personalities between them, constant banging by the zombies trying to get in, and sit back and watch your players sweat. If you really want to make them nervous, don't use this as just a one-shot with characters that they don't really care about, but instead mix it into the middle of your campaign and you should get total buy-in by your players. Some things to consider for this hook: who is the villain? Why did this happen? Is this perhaps just a curse and nothing more that happens every 600 years? Does the villain want something inside the tavern, like maybe an ancient sword on the wall of a sworn enemy? Or does the villain want someone inside? And do you want to include a boss fight with a giant zombie troll or a magic user? Next up, I present the simple and fun Haunted Mansion. I love this hook because as a dungeon master, you get to just throw out all of the rules. Even the initial setup can be a little sloppy and still be plausible enough to literally throw anything you want at your players. And to top it all off, this hook works for a serious game table and for DMs looking for a silly night of laughs in the spirit of Halloween's at pretty much any levels that your players might be. Here's the hook I'd go with, but of course, as I mentioned earlier, feel free to customize it to your group and your players. The players roll into town and there just so happens to be a festival going on. It can be as big or as little as you want, but during the festival, a small child goes missing. When people realize what happened, they begin to search the town, only to find an enormous mansion where it shouldn't be. Get creative and come up with a backstory for this mansion. Maybe it was burned down 100 years ago when the town discovered a hag coven was luring children inside. Maybe it was an old greedy mage who summoned a demon only to have his entrails splattered all over the living room. And make sure that the town views it incredibly superstitiously. Kids have gone inside before and never returned, or maybe the next last owner's family all hung themselves, etc., before the town burned it down. The villain inside can literally be anything you want. It can be a hag coven, one of my go-to monsters, just powerful spirits, or it could literally be the house itself that was cursed and is played like an antagonist. And I wouldn't be afraid to throw in anything, guys, even if it doesn't make sense. Every monster in the book is fair game here, from simply statting the house like a kraken with black tentacles, all the way to oozes. Trap everything and make it a total funhouse dungeon. I would definitely make furniture move and have my players start to see things both terrifying and odd. Have one catch themselves in the mirror where their skin starts to molt off their bones and their rotting body reaches through and tries to pull them into another plane. And maybe another player sees a little white rabbit move from one room to another before a door slams behind the player following it to split the party. Go absolutely overboard with the weird here and really just have a good time. And finally, make sure that your goal is something simple like finding the girl and getting out of the house, or destroying the powerful mage ghost haunting the basement, assuming, of course, the players can even survive that long. The third D&D Halloween campaign hook is the Lost in the Woods archetype. Oh boy, so much range with this one. So 3 things pop to mind right off the bat. The first is from one of the scariest movies of all time, The Blair Witch Project. The second and third are the simple werewolf pack and a creature from Supernatural, the Wendigo. The premise for all of these are pretty much the same. Your players are lost in the woods. How you get them there is totally up to you, and I'd suggest just not overthinking it too much. Ultimately, you want them to get into the woods with preferably a small party of NPCs. This added detail will give you a little bit more story and dialogue between them for the evening, and it'll also set you up to start brutally killing them off one by one. The monster here is really dependent on the flavor that you want to give it, but the adventure is less about killing the beast than setting the tone that your players feel outmanned and like they are the ones being hunted. To give a bit of detail on the Wendigo from Supernatural, it's basically an old human that turned to cannibalism, which gave it more strength and faster speed. It's obviously as smart as a human who has honed their hunting skills for centuries. It can mimic cries for help, see exceptionally well in the dark, reach down from treetops to snatch up its victims, and it can only be killed with fire. So if you want to stat out your own version of the Wendigo for your game, really play into that fact, as part of the fun, at least for you as the dungeon master, is watching your players try and figure out what it is that's hunting them one by one. So don't give away too much too fast. Halloween hook number 4 is probably one of the more difficult to pull off, but maybe one of the most satisfying if you manage to actually do it, and that's the Headless Horseman. Great story, well known, and a fun movie. But how do we turn this story into an adventure for our players? Here are some of the basic points that you should focus on. First off, your ghost, zombie, evil spirit, whatever, needs a solid backstory. Maybe you want your version of the Headless Horseman not to actually be a Headless Horseman at all, but rather the spirit of a woman who was burned at the stake after falsely being accused of being a witch. Maybe your spirit was once a soldier wrongfully accused of murder, and now they're back for revenge against the town. Or maybe they're simply a man who once made a deal with the demon to save his daughter from a terrible illness, and now he's cursed in the afterlife to do the demon's bidding. After backstory, your spirit needs some heft behind them. That's to say that a simple confrontation with your group should result in them getting their butts kicked. If your players are just trying to corner it so that they can fight it with swords and spells, then it isn't scary or powerful enough. Finally, I'd suggest that the main villain of this adventure actually be someone in the town, not necessarily the spirit themselves. By having someone control the powerful being, you can create a totally different story experience than find the evil thing and stab it until it's no longer a problem. This adventure is about the town, not the horsemen. So have a woman controlling it with black magic that is using it against only certain individuals. It'll really be best if players think that people getting targeted are random, but the more they dig in and talk with the townsfolk, the more of the backstory that they begin to unfold, leading them slowly to the real villain. Top that off with several of the townsfolk claiming to have seen the ghostly rider with mismatch accounts of its appearance, and you'll give your players a sense of the unknown with what's really going on, and that's the point. Then when they finally see it off in the distance, turn and right away, you can give them a sense of progression in the story. I'd suggest a simple love triangle or an old murder of a sibling that was covered up by some of the townsfolk as a great couple of motivation seeds for your true villain. And finally, we're drawing some inspiration from the psychological thriller Saw. The setup for this is to ask your players for information on their character's backstory. What we're really looking for is a skeleton in the closet, something bad that they did that they wouldn't want anyone else to know about. But here's the dirty little dungeon master trick to do this. First, layer in this question with several other questions, like what's your character's biggest fear? What's the one thing that they are the most proud of? Who had the biggest impact on their life, etc. Secondly, ask them these questions now, as far out from your Halloween session as possible, so hopefully that the players have a few weeks to forget what you asked them with these questions. Okay, now for the hook. Someone or something has started paying attention to the party. The villain here may not even be relevant, as your players may not even get the chance to actually face off against it anyways. But this someone or something has taken the time to study and learn about the players and the characters, and has discovered their deep, dark secrets. Now it's time to teach them a deadly lesson. This is great to throw into the middle of a larger campaign, as for this adventure, regardless of where they were, they find themselves in a dungeon shackled in some pretty terrible places. If you want to make sure your players don't feel like you're just cheating them, by the way, you can always have a strange NPC encounter with the party beforehand, right? You just want to introduce them to somebody a little bit odd, just to give them a little bit of plausibility to the terrible things that you're about to do to them. Now, here's where we're going to go off script a bit from the actual movie. We absolutely do not want to keep the players in individual shackles all night. That's incredibly boring. Please don't do that. I'd suggest hooking them up to something that can hurt them a little bit, but only for a limited time. You want the players grouped up and roaming the dungeon, not taking damage from a spiked collar all night. As the party regroups, looks for weapons, and tries to figure out what the hell is going on, have several of the rooms in your dungeon laid out that will reveal to the entire party those deep, dark secrets from each of the party members. Drawings, painted portraits of loved ones, the item that they once stole from a farmer along with the whip used to beat the person that got pinned on in their place, and on and on. If you play your cards right, you should be able to create a bit of character development between your players and their characters, while at the same time the group is in the middle of an adventure fighting for their lives. Also guys, be sure to key into what your specific group enjoys at the table. If they're that group that just loves throwing dice and beating up monsters, be sure to trickle in some combat for them. And I would avoid an entire evening of traps where the party's rogue is doing all the work all night while the rest of the group just watches from the sidelines. And finally, how you end this adventure is totally up to you. Maybe all your players need to do is survive and escape, or maybe you want to have them face off against some evil mastermind. If you do, I would suggest actually giving them a teleport escape route, as this is one of those few times where it's actually plausible. And now you have a new reoccurring villain completely on the side of your main adventure storyline. So hopefully there are a few new ideas to spark a frightful evening of Dungeons and Dragons in the spirit of Halloween. And by the way, guys, one thing I want to plug real quick before we get out of here is the new Jetpack 7 Kickstarter for the Legendary Dragons book. Now, this is not technically a sponsored video, but I'm excited to announce that I get to be a contributing writer for this book, along with some other absolutely incredible writers who have been in this industry for years and years, and I'm just incredibly honored to be a part of this project. I'll throw a link down in the description box below where you guys can go and check it out for yourselves. The Kickstarter still has a few more days, and they're well into their bonus content and stretch goals for this thing, so it's shaping up to be one hell of a book. So now it's time to pass it over to you guys in the community. What do you guys think about Halloween games? Do you have any tips for running horror games? And do you have an adventure hook for all of us? I want to give a huge shout out to all of the amazing, kick-ass, wonderful, spectacular patrons over at welcomeadventures.com. Guys, simply put, it's because of you that I get to continue to do this. Without Patreon, this channel would not survive, and so for that, I'm just incredibly, incredibly grateful. If you like this content, you want to support more videos like this, welcomeadventures.com is a great way to support the channel and grab some extra rewards for yourself. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I'd love to have you subscribe. Every week I put out new videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit the subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.